everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hello, Rob. It's me, Diana Perry Cruz. You might recognize me from living here with you in your house.
Yes.
And it's me, Jackie, who does not live here, and I just sneak in through the window every week. And then you just find me sitting
We would let
here.
you in the door, you know.
No, I don't want that.
I know.
Just wait down here.
I want to be elfish and sneak in through the window.
Oh, boy. Well,
Then we could sing Melissa Etheridge, "Come to my window."
no, we're not going to do that.
But Rob,
But we could.
and we could look at the alternative behaviors if I came through the window. And then every time I came through the window, Diana came in and sang Melissa Etheridge with me, versus if I came in through the door and I just came in through the door and everyone
We had to
just said,
sing a Three Doors Down song.
"Ooh." Yeah. So I might allocate my responding differently based on the rate of reinforcement right there.
I mean, for me, I would select a track that is playing I Want to Come Over versus Come to My Window 100% of the time.
I love
I'm
that.
very sensitive to the tunes of I Want to Come Over versus Come to My Window, which is, meh. I have a bias, a reinforcement bias, one might say.
So you would always pick, even though if it was harder, you'd always pick I Want to Come Over?
I suppose if you experimentally manipulated through some parametric analysis, like what I would do before getting to hear that song, I suppose my rate of responding might change a little bit.
What if I
love
always said, to hell with the concert plans?
That's what I say too.
I still
Just
wouldn't.
the wrong
To hell
word.
with the concert plans.
I always thought it was like she was going to her concert.
Same.
Right, but it's consequence.
No, if you want to hear a podcast about the discussion of this song, you can listen to my old podcast before we did ABA Inside Track, which was a podcast about songs. This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss it. And in case you couldn't get it from our thinly veiled commentary, we're talking about the matching law today.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which is an episode that kept being the episode. We kept saying, oh no, we're out of room. What episode should we kick to another month? How about the matching law? Except we finally ran out of runway. And guess what, everybody? We didn't want to do the matching law for episode 300 because what a downer. So we're doing it.
It's not a downer. It's not a downer.
Matching law.
Rob's
just
old
harder.
podcast was called They're Playing Our Song.
Yep. It's a
If
great
anyone
podcast.
wants to check that out.
Yep. You can find if you actually look through the ABA Inside Track archive, I posted one of the episodes as a tester to make sure the feed worked. So you can listen to it there.
That's
or you can
cute.
search it.
That's cute. You can hear me talk about my favorite song.
What if we just, instead of recording this, I just take the two Melissa Etheridge episodes we were referencing, smoosh them together, we call it a day?
We make a Melissa Etheridge mashup.
You get to pick which one do you want to download, and then that'll be the matching law. We'll match it to the generalized matching equation. It'll be great. And then we'll be done.
Love that.
And it will be just as relevant as one of the articles we're going to be talking about today. But anywho, that's what we're talking about. It's the matching law, which, everybody, I don't mean to get down on the matching law because I think the matching law is bad or dumb.
Get down.
I love the matching law as a law and as a principle. Do I like reading research about the matching law? Sometimes, but not all the time. And I took the article that I'm not super excited about talking about. I took that one for the team, the basketball team, if you will.
Oh, I like that article. We should have switched.
Really? Ugh.
Yeah.
It is.
Don't be like that.
Don't be like what?
We should be supportive of the articles because people went to a lot of work to
Yeah,
write them.
I actually really like that.
I have
article.
done almost 300. We have done more than 300 episodes of this podcast if you count book clubs and everything else. And I think I have been the most positive human being on this show more often than not. I'm going to take this one as my negative episode. I'm calling it. It's mine. All right.
Anyway.
You can't take that from me. Anywho, what episode is this? It's about the matching law. What articles are we reading? Diana, tell us.
She's surprised yet again.
Jeez Louise.
All right, fine. I will tell you. They include,
No, I don't want to know anymore. Who cares?
I'm going to talk about them in the order that I think we should discuss them.
Okay.
Okay. Which is
Is it
coming
the
as
order that's in the notes?
Nope.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
I think we should discuss them in the following order. The Matching Law, a tutorial for practitioners by Reed and Kaplan, published in Behavior Analysis and Practice in the year with no years, which was 2011.
Yes.
2011. I want to be 11. I wish I was born in 2000.
Make the math easier.
Yeah. I was 21 then, but it actually is pretty easy because I was born in 1980 and today's my birthday. Just everyone.
I know. Oh, I didn't know if you wanted everyone to know that today is your birthday.
Today is my birthday and we're talking about the magic law.
Happy birthday, Jackie.
And I'm not
There's
21.
no better way to spend your birthday than talking about the matching law.
I know. I know. We were going to switch it around. I was like, no. Let's make Derek Reed proud.
Okay. Well, we're going to try, and we're going to follow up that article with this one. The matching law provides a quantitative description of social time allocation in children with autism by Morris and Vollmer. That was published in JABA 2022. And to round it out, generality of the matching law as a descriptor of shot selection in basketball by Alferink, Critchfield, Hitt, and Wiggins. And that was in JABA 2009.
Cool.
I had that as our second one.
Do you want to go? You can have it be second, I guess. You just seem like you don't want to discuss it.
Well, I have to discuss it because we only have 3 articles and we all have to discuss something. And I wrote a lot of notes and I put a lot of thought into this one.
Okay.
And I thought, why don't we end on the one that I think is a much more interesting application of the matching law? But if you'd like to end with me being a grump, I suppose
it's not an application of the matching law. None of this is an application of the matching law. It's an uncoverance of the matching law.
Oh, my God. Oh. Why are you making this worse?
I'm not. I'm trying to help you understand what we're doing. But you can go second.
No, I appreciate it. Please mansplain to me more about the matching law. I'm sure it'll make this conversation all the more entertaining.
You know, no one has asked us to talk about the matching law, but I don't think that's because people might not be interested to hear.
I think they're scared.
The matching law is scary.
It's scary. I think anything with equations sometimes can be scary. Especially, I don't think the simple matching law equation is not scary. Makes a lot of sense.
It is still scary if you're not a math person.
Yes.
And you have no background in quantitative.
Truth. I guess you're right.
Yeah.
But when you get into like the generalized matching law and the hyperbolas, that gets a little bit, even me, I'm like, why do they have to log things? What's this little s? What's the big K? It's not a big K, it's actually a little K, but yeah. So
well, let's start there then. Let's talk about Reed and Kaplan.
Sure.
Jackie, you're going to take the lead on that discussion.
Yeah.
Because it's a nice tutorial for practitioners.
I
think they probably should have called it something that's kind of a tutorial and kind of complicated for practitioners would have been a more accurate description.
One thing I want to say about behavior analysis and practice in the 2000s was that I loved that they had a ton of these tutorials for things that were so confusing and scary because they had it for CMOs. They had a tutorial now for the matching law. And I just think it's a nice way to allow people to get into these more complicated and nuanced phenomena, I guess, right? Without having to like go by Cooper again, right? And Cooper doesn't really even give you everything because it can't. Yeah. So I really love this tutorial. It does get a little weedy because the matching law is a little weedy, but one thing I appreciated about this article overall is they were like, they did it in the beginning. It's like, wow, I actually understand the matching law until we get to the generalized matching law. This is how I teach it too. I'm always like, I understand. And then I get here, I'm like,
hold up.
Maybe.
They should make 2 articles. One is just that first part so everyone can read it and be like, wow, I'm so excited. I can't wait to read the second one, which is all the other stuff about the generalized matching law. And it's a little confusing, but at least it might get a little hard, but that's okay because I'm not that big a dummy because I read the first article pretty well.
Yeah, but the nice thing is, one thing I found
the Matrix Reloaded
helpful. Yeah, one thing I didn't watch even the first Matrix, but the one thing I like.
Have you ever seen something and you were like, "This is changing cinema," and I love it, and then you watch the next one and you're like, "What the hell is this? This is the worst," and I don't care about the first one even more now. It's a negative movie.
No, but I can say that about the third Anna Green Gables film.
Okay,
fair enough. Doing that one.
She goes to war and does not follow the books.
I thought that was a package film and they just made it Anne of Avonlea.
No, Anne of Avonlea is a different one. That's
don't mess with Jackie on
Don't mess with me.
I only ever saw the first 2.
Anne is my birthday. We're watching it when we get home.
Now I saw Anne Avonlea.
And then there's Anna Green Gables Part 3, The Continuing Saga.
What is it called?
The Continuing Saga.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not as good. It doesn't follow the books. I mean, it's okay, but it doesn't follow the books.
I know Gilbert gets scarlet fever.
Yeah, but anyway.
Is that in the third one or the
spoilers.
second
one? Oh my God.
No, that's in the second one because the third one he goes to war. Okay. Anyway, I like that they have a really hard equation. They try to explain everything, and then they give you an actually appropriate example.
Yeah.
From the research that is clinically relevant, right? Because the people that are reading these articles are practitioners. They're not like basic researchers that already know about the matching law because they don't need to read a tutorial, right? So
it'd be so sad if they did, wouldn't it?
they were like, oh my gosh,
I've been doing all these experiments with pigeons wrong for all these years.
Yeah, so in essence, the matching law really just looks at choice, like how behavior allocates to alternative reinforcers and responses, right? So in almost every instance of our lives, choice is always present, right? It's never that we have to do only one behavior. There's always multiple behaviors that we could choose from. Multiple schedules, a whole lot of variables. And what we decide to do is usually based on our history of reinforcement or punishment. And so by examining behavior and the allocation of reinforcers with those behaviors, we can actually determine preference. So they gave a really good example of kids playing on the playground, and you just observe the kids, and wherever they spend the most time, they probably like that the most. Mm-hmm. That's what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get it. I'm like feeling so smart now, feeling really smart, right? And so they say this is important because if we can observe this over time, we can have a history of reinforcement and we can have a history of aggregate responses, and that can help us predict and explain why someone's engaging in the present choice or the present behavior that they're doing, and it might help us to predict what they're going to do in the future. Mm-hmm. So that's always helpful. This is not new. The matching law has been around for a long time. So researchers have been talking about the matching law since the 1960s. This is when they were looking at basic research with pigeons and keypecks. Oh my gosh, today when I was writing this, it took me like 5 full minutes to remember what the keypeck, that it was called a keypeck. I'm like, the pigeon was
typing?
I'm like, hitting it, and I just couldn't think of it. And so what they found is that choice could be predicted and explained through looking at the relative rate of reinforcement for each response. And like we would expect, right? Mm-hmm. You saw more allocation of responding to denser rates of reinforcement than leaner rates of reinforcement, right? And so they discovered this in basic research with 2 pigeons pecking on keys, right? Each key had its own variable interval schedule. And for all of you, remember the variable interval schedule, you have to satisfy 2 requirements for those studying for the BACB exam. Mm-hmm. You have to satisfy the time requirement, and you have to perform the response after the time requirement has been met in order for reinforcement to be delivered.
Yes.
Just want everyone to remind that because
it's not a time-based schedule.
It's not time-based. It's variable. So those 2 things have to be met. So there was 2 schedules, 1 in each key. They were independent of each other. And so one was denser, one was leaner. They did that on purpose. And when they plotted the relative rates of reinforcement over the responses, they found a near perfect correlation. So they had...
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's like we know that behavior, or we believe that behavior is lawful and orderly, right? And not only is it lawful and orderly, it's so lawful and orderly that we can actually apply a formula to understand how behavior is going to operate under a set of conditions.
Right. So if you were going to graph this, the x-axis, I always have to do this. I have to make the graph. Even now, it's like 27
with your hands.
years older. Yep. Is the relative rate of reinforcement, and the y-axis is the relative rate of responding. And they found a perfect correlation as when the rate of reinforcement goes up, the rate of responding goes up. So then they have this diagonal line from the middle of the graph that goes up, and that typically equals 1 if it's perfect matching.
Yeah.
Okay. So then they made this equation to suggest this best fit line, and it's behavior 1 over behavior 1 plus behavior 2, right? Because there's not always just one behavior. There's usually other things that you can do, would equal reinforcement 1 over the total amount of reinforcement. So reinforcement 1 over reinforcement 2. Yeah. And they want to remind us that it doesn't have to just be response. It could also be time to represent duration, right? Yep. It's just how you would be measuring it. And so that was the beginning of the matching law.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful. And they suggest that it's not just in this clinical setting that we see that, but in research, but we also see it in the natural setting. They demonstrated through research in the 90s that they looked at appropriate behavior and inappropriate behavior, and they looked at the amount of reinforcement that was occurring or being provided for each, and they saw that there was a great example of whatever behavior was receiving more reinforcement was happening at more times. So they had aggressions and mans, right? But they figured that they're functionally dependent, meaning they're serving the same reinforcer, right? Aggression is trying to get something, mans is trying to get something. And they looked at allocating responses and they saw a near perfect line, which is beautiful and crazy. When you think about that would happen. Can you imagine like being late at night, looking at your cumulative record in your lab in the 60s and being like, oh my gosh, look at this beauty. But anyway, so anyway.
Maybe they did that.
Maybe they did that, maybe not. But what they found is that it happens like that a lot, but not all the time. So not all the time does it match perfectly, right? So it might slope upwards or it might slope downwards or it might not even equal 1, right? And so this is where they needed to kind of help the equation along to help predict behavior. That's what we're trying to do here. Predict behavior in the future. Is then they added the generalized matching equation. So they add a little bit more here. And one example that might happen here is if a right-handed child is expected to sort pictures from a pile on either the right or left side of the table, the child might demonstrate a bias for the right, given their handiness. Another thing that I have found is if you are a child that loves the color pink, right? Yes. And there's like all of the responses you could make, and there are pink things. You're going to do all the pink things first and then do the other things. So that might be something that you're going to see a different slope there because of bias. And so what they did here is they wanted to account for those biases in the equation. So they did a log of behavior 1 over behavior 1 plus behavior 2 equals S log over reinforcement 1 over reinforcement 1 over reinforcement 1 plus reinforcement 2 equals log B.
Yes.
The generalized matching equation. So the S represents the best fit line, right? That slope. Hopefully it equals 0. We want it to get as close to 0 as close to 1 as we want, right? Because that means that we can predict what's behavior. And then B represents the y-intercept or the bias.
Yeah. So bias can make it move up and down on the y-intercept. So this helps to account for like a side bias, like you're saying.
And so here, this is really helpful because if this can also look at sensitivity to reinforcement, right? So if it's very, very high or very, very low, that might show that the slope. The slope. The slope is very high or very low. It might show that there is an overmatching or an undermatching, right? So meaning it's going to be over the slope line, that perfect one, or under that slope line. And they have a really nice figure that shows all of the difference of strict matching, a bias for overmatching or undermatching, and some of the things that you could be biased toward, right? A certain color, space in the space, effort, rate of reinforcement, the quality of the reinforcement, the delay to reinforcement, and the effort of the response to engage in that reinforcement. And so previous research, they pull out here and show that these dimensions may be idiosyncratic reinforcers for responses. So let's say you are looking at the rate of response to the reinforcement, and it looks like pretty good, but then you see a little dip, and you're like, I wonder why that dip's there. You could go in and now vary those specific variables and then use that to account for what you're going to do in the future in your treatment plan. So I just like that. And if you don't see that if you don't see that change in bias, then you can just use those reinforcers as substitutable for those different responses like the aggression and the manding. But if you do, then you have to isolate some variables first. And so some more relevant research that they looked at, which I totally agree with, is that they looked at students in mastered tasks. And if they had mastered tasks, they would engage in these mastered tasks. But if they had a harder task, even if you added more reinforcers to those harder tasks, they still engage in the less effortful task because it's easier, right? So that would show more of a bias, right, based on effort. And so in that instance, you may be like, oh, according to the matching law, I'm just going to throw me more reinforcers at this behavior and it's going to work. But here, that may not work. And then students may engage in more off-task behavior, right? More, the behaviors we don't want to see because they're less effortful, but they're still providing the same quality of reinforcement. So,
sure.
Something to think about. So the S is the sensitivity reinforcement, represents the amount of change in behavior. So when S is close to 1, that's great. That's what we're looking for, right? And overmatching is when the S is greater than 1, so the slope is more. When it's undermatching, the S is lower than 1. And if it's really, really far away from the line, it may indicate that there's an indifference to reinforcement.
Yes.
Completely. So you might really need to think about that.
So if your slope is 0,
that's bad.
Then you don't really have a reinforcer.
Right.
There.
Yeah.
Instead.
So that's helpful for practitioners.
Yes.
If clients demonstrate maybe. They'll be like,
well, it's helpful to understand why you get the results that you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always helpful. Mm-hmm. It's just that you might not be looking at it through this lens, right? If clients demonstrate overmatching, they're probably not contacting the programmed reinforcers associated with each of the behaviors, specifically on that relatively leaner schedule of reinforcement.
Yeah.
And the good example that they had was they have a student and they're allocating almost all of their responding to the therapist that had provided more reinforcement and greater quality of reinforcement, like 90% of the time. But then for the other therapist, they didn't even get to experience that sort of reinforcement. So it might, that might be a problem when you're talking about satiation, right? Yeah. And thinking of all those different variables. So you would want to do that. And so this is the last kind of like page and a half is where it gets weedy. When they start talking about looking at the variance that's accounted for, they're like, yes, it's pretty good. The generalized matching equation is really good. If you're looking, you can actually look at the variance that can account for these equations. And this is where if you're not mathy, it gets a little harder to understand.
There is something about some of these papers on complex topics where I'm wondering why somebody didn't step in and say, this is brilliant. Please, stop. Leave everyone with the win of a now I understand. I know that that's not everything you want to tell them, but that's okay. Write another article. It would be okay. You don't have to get it all into the one, especially if you call it tutorial. If you're going to call it a tutorial, it really should end on and now you know everything you need for tomorrow. And come back later, next month or next quarter, and we'll give you a little bit more.
Yeah, so this one, right, it's really just looking at, again, trying to see how much you can predict based on this equation. And they said they can predict up to 98% using the generalized matching equation in the real world, right? So
which is very impressive.
Yeah, the closer that you can get to 1, the more you can predict behavior, right? Mm. And it can let you know that it's the reinforcer rates alone and not something else. So then moving, I think, even farther to try to predict more behavior is the Herrnstein's hyperbola. Mm-hmm. And this is used to account for behavior when there are not just 2 instances of behavior. So there's a lot, right? So now they've added the BE. It's like a little fancy E. Mm-hmm. And that's supposed to account all the behavior that could be in the environment. And then the RE, right?
All the reinforcement.
All the reinforcement that can be. So with the sum of all the B's into a K and the sum of all the reinforcers into the RE, they've made the Herrnstein's hyperbola, right? And so that one is very similar. It's just B1 equals K times R1 over R1 plus RE.
It's very simple.
It's simple but hard.
Yeah.
Right? And so here, you're not looking at this perfect slope, but more of a curve, right? A hyperbola is an open curve that curves upward away from the origin and then continues, and then it will decelerate until it's a flat horizontal line, right? So it kind of looks like a curvy curve.
Yeah.
And it's going to be nearly parallel with the x-axis. And here, this part was very confusing for me, but they brought it home with this really nice implication for practice, and they were like, okay, look at differential reinforcement. Doesn't always require extinction, but you have to have a different way to provide different amounts of reinforcement to the appropriate behavior and the inappropriate behavior. So you're going to reinforce more than the other, right? But there's also going to be other reinforcers that are going to impact this behavior in the clinical world. And so that's where you might see that flatlining, right? You only can provide so much of a reinforcer. Which is true.
No, it's very true. And I think that take-home point is valuable. One of the challenges I always think I have with the matching law is once I get into, so what's the matching law? Well, it's sort of how we allocate behavior. Oh, is there an equation? Yep. I don't really need to know it, though. I'm just looking for the idea that people will allocate their responses to, differently based on reinforcement as one factor, as well as some other factors. And there's a whole graph if you want to get into it, but you probably don't need to if you want to just go live your life.
It's true. That's true.
That's very true.
But I think that's one of the reasons I rarely want to engage much more than like the first half of this article with the matching law, because it's one of those like, this is really cool to know. I don't need to know more than, do I need to know more than this? And I don't know if I do.
No, well, it's the same way that it's like, I really appreciate all those cancer researchers doing all that work to make sure that we have the best tools possible to fight cancer. Mm-hmm. But I don't understand what exactly they do, right? But when they say we have the best tools possible, I trust them.
Yes.
Right? It's obviously not the same stakes, perhaps, right? But it's the same idea, which is someone saying, we have a lawful and orderly understanding of how behavior operates. Can we show it to you? Yeah, we can. Mm-hmm. Do you want to see it? Maybe not.
If you're going to show me an equation with a log in it, I'm not trying to relive high school. I don't think I need to know.
Right, but like, it's on the backside. It's behind the wall, right? Like, these researchers have shored up the idea that we can understand and predict behavior.
Mm-hmm. And using it in something that's already, like the mathematical equation, that it very rarely is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Discussion of bias, discussion of sensitivity, like having those as concepts that I can think about in terms of, well, someone saying, yeah, but sometimes this kid does this and that doesn't make sense. It's like, well, as humans, as opposed to robots, there are reasons that we might not match perfectly to this equation. There's going to be some bias inherent in this. We see with pigeons, it'll come in the other articles we discuss. So I do appreciate kind of having a scientific underpinning as to why that could be, rather than just like, I don't know, behavior, which is a terrible explanation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's just hard.
Yeah.
It's
However,
just hard,
getting into the nitty gritty of the numbers is where I start going, yep, okay, great. Yep, keep going. What do I do with this? Thank you for the concepts. And I appreciate that if I needed someone to do my numbers for me,
you could.
So, most behavior analysts are clinically practicing behavior analysts, and they, and including us, like rarely contact this type of work. So it's like behavior analysts are already a super small portion of the population, and then probably proportionally about the same is the number of people in behavior analysis who are quantitative behavior analytic researchers. There's not that many folks who are doing it, but I am glad that they are doing this work. And I appreciate that Reed and Kaplan have presented it to us and included a lot of examples here that can make it, transferable, I guess, over if you're not busy enjoying making formulae and fitting curves in Excel.
I do also love it when they provide additional resources. And one of them, I think, highlights the difference in this article. Maybe it's your second article, Rob, that you're going to read. It is the review. Oh, no, it's the technical primer on the matching law for researchers.
Ooh.
That one seems terrifying.
The reason we didn't pick that one for the episode.
But yeah, so I like that they also give you a tutorial on using Excel to do the analysis, even though Excel has been it's a little outdated, but we could probably update that, right?
Yeah, my article used Prism.
Yeah. And so I just like that they have ways that we can access this basic literature in a clinical way, even though it's not always.
Yeah, and it's not easily accessible, to be honest, even finding this information. So Jackie and I took a class in quantitative analysis of behavior kind of around this time, probably around 2010, right? Before this article came out.
It was not
out. And
I wish it was.
Jason Beret was our professor, and he lamented very often during that class that there wasn't really any textbook or like set of materials that one could easily study from and teach students about quantitative. So we were lucky again to have him as well, that he could walk us through this. But I remember him being shocked that we did not know how to make formula in Excel.
Yeah.
But we didn't.
It's kind
now
of
we
Jason
do.
to always assume that everyone should be able to do many of the things that seem to come so easy to him. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
For thinking the best of all of us.
And we didn't say it, but like Baum and Rocklin are like the originators of the original matching law, and then Herrnstein for the generalized.
Right.
And then, Rob, your article, the predecessor article is Bray and Vollmer, right?
Jason and Vollmer.
I can say that Baum-Ax was the seminal article on generalized matching equation.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but Herrnstein did the hyperbola.
Oh, okay. Yeah. My bad.
Well,
just to...
That was really good, Jackie.
Someone would have errated us.
Thank you. So we've got a good handle on the basics of what one might need to know about the matching law. But what does that mean outside of the lab? Let's take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about 2 uses of the matching law to describe behavior in real life. I guess pigeons are real life too, but you know what I mean, real life. We'll be right back.
Hi, do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a board certified behavior analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree, just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
And we are back talking all about the matching law. But before we talk more about the matching law, I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. And by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast player to put in some key information about yourself, as well as 2 secret code words. And the first one right now, in honor of Jackie's birthday, cupcake, CUPCAKE. If you had a big slice of cake and a little cupcake and the responses were the same, what would the matching law predict that you would take? I don't know. That seems specific to you. Maybe the cupcake? We'd have to repeat it over and over. And then
I would need to know flavors.
You'd get sick after a while. Like, I don't think this experiment's doable. Everyone would satiate so quickly on cupcakes or cake. So, you know what? Let's just leave it as a code word, cupcake. All right. So we talked at the beginning, Jackie led us in a discussion of Reed and Kaplan's tutorial on the matching law. But what could we do with the matching law now that we have some understanding of it? And so we've got 2 studies. Diana, you know what? Let's go with your order. Let's start. Why don't you discuss Morris and Vollmer's matching law article on social time allocation?
Are you sure?
Let's do it.
Because I don't care.
You know what? I don't know. How many times will we have to record this podcast, and we'll see which one we choose each time, and we'll graph it, and maybe it's a hyperbola.
We're not
Joke's on you.
doing
This
that.
is not reinforcing. JK.
There's just so much silence in this episode because no one says anything.
All right, let me find my article then.
If only there was more log talk.
It's been found. Oh, you should make the picture be Ren and Stimpy. I love log.
Oh, that's a good one.
I love Ren and Stimpy.
It was going to be a picture of people making a graph with their hands like Jackie did because I thought that was funny, but not. I'll do the log one.
I make a graph with my hands anytime I think about graphing. I literally have to make it.
I have to do that when I talk about left and right.
Same.
So it's all right.
All of the things.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I got it. Okay, here we go. That's
Can
the
I see
podcast
it?
start. Not really because all my computer's tied into a recording. I'll show you later.
Okay, fine.
I have it open.
I'll see it when the listeners get to see it. Okay, so I want to tell you about this Morris and Vollmer article. And let me also note that this is like the 3rd in a series of articles similar to this on this topic. I just happened to choose this one kind of arbitrarily. But if this floats your boat, you can go back and listen or find or read other articles that do a similar thing. Okay. So what they wanted to do here was look to see if the matching law could be applied to understand response allocation for 8 children with autism in a version of what I have always called the split room assessment. And I will describe what that looks like, but it was in order to measure sensitivity to and preference for social interaction for these individuals. They had been doing this work for a while, so almost all these children had already been exposed to this, and they had a lot of footage of it. And as they were using that, or, looking at that footage, they said, I wonder if we can't use the matching law to explain how everyone is operating within this room when there are 2 sides of the room, one experimenter, and the experimenter interacts with the child only when the child is on that side of the room, right? So you have 2 responses that are happening here, which is standing near the experimenter and standing away from the experimenter, and 2 presumed reinforcers available for each of those things, one which is social interaction and one which is being alone or avoiding social interaction. And so they wanted to determine if they could utilize the matching law to see if behavior allocated as might be expected, and whether that application could also be used to determine the preference for social interaction for each of the individual children. So, like I said, I have a history with this as calling it the split room assessment, because that's what we called it when we were using a version of this for research a long time ago. And it's very similar what they did, except when I did it, we had 2 experimenters. So other than that, it's almost exactly the same. So what happens is you put a piece of tape down the center of a room. It's like a smallish room, most likely. Ours was small. Theirs had a table and 2 chairs on each side and toys on each side. And the child would be brought into the room and kind of like lined up right in the middle of the room. And then depending on where they went in the room, there would be different consequences. So in the version I did, there was one side of the room where there was an experimenter present, but they just didn't interact. They just read a book. And then the other side of the room, there was an experimenter present. And when the child went over there, they would play with them and interact. Theirs was slightly different in that the experimenter would move between the different sides of the room on a variable but predetermined schedule. So whichever side of the room the experimenter was on, when the child crossed the tape and entered into that side of the room, the experimenter would provide social interaction with them. It was kind of less than I just described, where in the version I did, it was a lot of playing together. And this one, it was oh, I'm glad you're over here to play with me. Ooh, look at what you're doing, right? It was kind of observational statements. And then there was another level where if the child manded in whatever format to have the experimenter join them and play, then the experimenter would join them.
So more like what we talk about when we talk about sort of pairing interactions. You don't just jump in and let me grab all your toys and play with them. Won't this be fun?
Yeah.
Unless mandated to do so. Yes.
So they had to emit really specific mands to have more interaction. They called this an assessment of sociability, is kind of how that they talked about it, and they said that it was being used to measure the relative reinforcing efficacy of social interaction for each individual child, recognizing that the reinforcing efficacy of social interaction for each child likely is idiosyncratic per individual. So that was a big portion of this study. When we've been talking about the standard matching law and the pigeon research and everything, the reinforcer is food because the pigeons are held to, some percentage of free feeding weight. And in doing so, it's very clear that food is going to be a highly motivating reinforcer. But in the real world, we're talking about all different types of things that may be reinforcers, ? But not everybody likes the same stuff. So we can't go in necessarily with that same automatic assumption or level of assumption on what's going to function as a reinforcer, right? So we're maybe social interaction will be reinforcing. We actually don't know. Using this type of, overlaying this type of equation here could help us determine that as well. Let me see here. They also note that the individuals in the study had all varying levels of communication ability. And so this was a good way as well to test for non-vocal verbal individuals to determine preference. I'm always interested in finding additional ways that we can determine preference for non-vocal verbal individuals. So it's good to know that this could fall into that area. They give us a lovely table where they show us the various matching law equations. There's the simple one. Hang on, let me look to see what they called all of them. I didn't write that part down. Okay, strict was the first version that Jackie talked about. Time-based was another one that you didn't discuss. Oh, no, you did. I'm sorry. You did, yeah. But they list that one out separately. So rather than B for behavior, we have T for time. Then we have the generalized matching law, which adds in the log and the A and the B parameters. And then now we have this one here, which is what they are calling the sociability matching law. It's just like the generalized matching law. So don't get too worried about that. Except rather than having time and reinforcement, we have P and TH. I read this article several times. Nowhere could I find what P and TH were, except finally this morning when I woke up out of bed, I said, TH is therapist and P must be participant.
Boom, you did it.
I don't know if I just keep missing it in the study or if it's supposed to be implied and I'm just a dum-dum for not knowing what they were talking about. So they were not trying to break it down so much and measure like each individual, supposed reinforcing statement by the therapist or anything like that. It was much simpler than that. They were just measuring what side of the room was the kid on and was it the same side of the room as the therapist is pretty much how it broke down. Okay. I was very proud of myself that I finally sorted that out. And then after that, they tell us, so now that we have this equation, that now we can think about how the matching law would be applied here and think about what it would mean if we got these varying slopes and how well the behavior, matched on to the matching law or to a slope of 1. So if we had a slope greater than 0, then that would indicate that social interaction was at least somewhat reinforcing for that individual. Because remember, as Jackie said, if it's a slope of 0, then it's neutral, right? Mm-hmm. Then the thing that you think is a reinforcer is just a neutral stimulus. And we wouldn't expect the child to either move toward the social side with the therapist or away from the social side. So if it's greater than 0, then that would be like positive toward the social interaction being reinforcing. If it was a slope of 1, then that would indicate that social interaction would be what they called potently reinforcing, or I'm sorry, greater than 1, potently reinforcing. Mm-hmm. And then if it was a slope less than 0, so negatively oriented, or for anyone listening at home, like a slope of 1 looks like a strong increasing trend, right? A slope less than 0 would be a somewhat decreasing trend in terms of just thinking about the direction that we would need to draw the fit curve line. So that would mean that social interaction would be at least somewhat aversive, and then a slope less than -1 would show that social interaction is aversive, because in that case, the individual will be actively moving away.
I will allocate all of my responding to getting the hell away from you.
Yes, yes. And then when I have experience with this, some kids, that's absolutely what they do.
What were you doing wrong?
Nothing.
Oh, I just took data. It wasn't me.
Okay. It was some other therapist who was.
I think I ran the camera for I honestly don't even remember where these studies ended up.
Throwing somebody else under the bus for being
they may have been a file drawer study.
Unpleasant.
No, there were multiple therapists in the version I did, and they rotated who was on which side. So no one developed a complex.
Nobody had to be the one that was. That's the bad therapist that nobody likes.
The way they did it in this study is better, really, too, because that is another potential variable present there, because they were two different people. We didn't have identical twins like they do in Face Off on Netflix. I know you don't know what I'm talking about. But that's okay.
Nope.
I don't either.
It's a makeup artist show.
Oh,
it's okay. It's a tangent.
I care about that show about as much as I care about the Match-Alon basketball.
All right. I don't know what I was talking about.
Oh no, we've all moved to the other side of the room.
Stop it. Okay, so so it's not good or bad to like social interaction, right?
Right. You like it or you don't.
Yep, exactly. It's just a preference.
I mean, as long as you are running it as an experiment like this, as opposed to usually this child does love social reinforcement. Then you'd be curious as to why your matching law is not playing out. It's because
that is interesting.
Unpleasant.
Yeah.
Not the student.
Remind me to bring that back up at the end. Yeah, so some kids really like social interaction. Some kids really don't. And I absolutely saw that pattern emerge when I was running a version of this, was all I was trying to say.
You know, it'd be really funny is if it was a party and all of the people were on one side and then there was just a book and a glass of wine on the other, and Diane and I went into the room, we would instantly split.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
I also want a puzzle.
Yeah, okay. That's
But then
fair.
occasionally the crowd would have to move to the other side. Someone would have to grab the wine and book and move them to the other side, and then
I would say,
graph your allocation over time.
My wine.
My wine and puzzle.
Okay. So just as with the generalized matching law, the sociability matching law has a B parameter, which accounts for bias. So in this case here, it would be side of the room bias. And then an A parameter, which accounts for slope, which here represents the preference for or against social interaction. So the way I just described the steep or the non-steep slope. And then just a quote straight from this thing, so you guys get the full picture. The following things could be determined using this equation. 1, the amount of variance accounted for by equation 4 to determine if additional independent variables were needed to explain social time allocation. 2, participants' patterns of switching to the social and alone sides following an instance of a therapist movement. 3, the relative duration of visits to the social and alone sides of the room. And 4, the percentage of session on the social side. All right. So they're very excited. They have this whole thing set up. Now we need to see, does it actually work? Meaning, does it actually
demonstrate what they want us to demonstrate?
Yeah, right?
Can they match? Can they match the
data?
Does
it actually match? Yeah.
Generalized matching law.
Sorry, I didn't know what I was trying to say. We had 8 participants. They were all aged 3 to 8. They all had ASD diagnoses. 2 were identical twins. They snuck that piece in and an asterisk in the table, which I thought was funny. And then, as I've already described, the room was set up. So I presume that they were the same toys on both sides of the room. They didn't say that, but it seems obvious to me that that would have to be the case.
I thought it was mentioned somewhere, but yeah, maybe it wasn't explicit.
It's wherever they decided what P and TH were called. Mm-hmm. It's in that section.
Yeah.
So the start of the session, the therapist would already be in the room. They always started on the left side of the room. They said, for procedural integrity reasons, which I think means that they got confused sometimes about where they were supposed to be when. And so they were like, let's just have you always be on the left.
They were a great therapist, did not know their right from their left, though.
Yeah, right. It could have been me. Someone else would bring the participant in, stand them in the middle of the room, and say, go wherever you want. And if they went to the therapist side, that's when they got the social statements that were kind of generic unless they asked specifically for something. And if they went on the alone side, then the therapist did not interact. The therapist switched sides on a time-based schedule and would say, I'm going to play over here now. And sessions were 8 minutes long, is how that all went down. So the dependent variable, there were 2 things here. It was the duration the participant was on the left side of the room and the duration the participant was on the social side of the room, because you just subtract from that and you get the rest of the information, basically. And so then they measured the number of times that the participant kind of went back and forth, basically, by measuring what they called the risk ratio, which was dividing the probability of social or avoidance switches within 10 seconds of the therapist's movement, which was the conditional probability, by the probability of social or avoidance switches during any 10-second interval, regardless of therapist movement, which was the unconditional probability. So if this child was just flitting about, right, and moving back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, then sometimes they would be on the side with the therapist, but it wouldn't necessarily be because of the therapist being there to provide social interaction, right? It could be that they were just a busy bee. So in order to determine that component, that's why they did this whole breakdown. So is it when the therapist moved that then they moved, and then that would indicate they're probably more sensitive to that reinforcement, and or that it functioned as reinforcement at all. Okay. And so then you might be wondering what happened, right? There are tons of graphs in here. I'm mostly just going to stick to the
these
first
are these results
one.
Where it's like, anyway, there were lots of results, all of them slightly different.
Yeah.
And in the end of the day, any one result is irrelevant compared to the goal here, which is, does this seem to fit up with our matching law expected curves?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm like kind of a data nerd, right? But this is even more data nerdy than me, but you know that they were excited, right? They definitely wanted to analyze these data every which way, and they did so, and they all got published in here. But what I can tell you is for our 8 participants, they were able to fit their behavior across, I don't know if I said, I think there are 5 sessions for each participant, fit their behavior across these 5 sessions pretty clearly onto matching law curve for everyone. And everyone's data looked a little bit different is the other piece that you should know about too. So everyone's behavior was sensitive to reinforcement, some more so than others. So for example, a few folks like Lola and Lydia and Booker were 3 participants for whom social interaction did seem to function as a reinforcer, and that we had slopes here that were not quite 1, but were definitely positive and closer to 1 than not 1, basically. So for all 3 of these folks, it looked like they preferred to be on the side of the room with the therapist, and social interaction did function as a reinforcer. And then we had Felicity, whose data they were not quite the slope of her line where it's not quite 0, but it wasn't super far off from 0. So for her, it may, and there was a good amount of variance as well within the data across her sessions. So good indication for her that the presence of the therapist may really not have made a lot of difference for her movements around the room.
That's the graph.
Yeah, and she may not have been particularly sensitive to the presence of the therapist. And then we had 4 participants. Well, let me say, we had Chloe, Cedric, and Edward, all for whom had a negative slope to their line that was pretty similar to the first 3 that I described, except inverted. So they had a stronger preference toward social avoidance from the therapist, although it wasn't, let me just say, it wasn't as drastic a slope as Daniel. So Daniel had a very steep negative line for his graph, which indicated he was highly avoidant of social interaction. So it was really idiosyncratic across individuals. Yet, even though going into it, they didn't know whether this was going to function as a reinforcer or not, they were able to determine or discern through this process whether social interaction was reinforcing, and in doing so also fit their preferences to the matching law graph using this split room sociability assessment, which was cool. And then there were lots of other graphs, but I'm going to stop there so that you get to talk about basketball.
Okay. I liked that article a lot. I think the kind of the social split room assessment is always an interesting idea. I like the idea of looking at the matching law to have a more quantifiable means of, I feel like I'm getting into dissemination station. I'm not yet. More quantifiable means of looking at that relationship is fascinating. So I say all of this as preamble to the article I'll be discussing, which is Alfernick, Critchfield, Hitt, and Higgins in Generality of the Matching Law. It's a descriptor of shot selection in basketball. And I say this because I want everyone to know that I'm not down on the matching law. I do think this might be the most pointless article I have ever read in my entire career.
Rob.
I'm sorry. You know, sometimes I'll throw out an idea of like,
mean.
What? No, I feel like being like, I'm not mean that this is a bad article, that it was done poorly. It is an article that I kept scratching my head saying, why not only was this done, but why is this the 3rd or 4th article looking at this relationship?
I can tell you why.
Why?
Because the data are there.
Okay. There's a lot of data out there. There's not a better relationship for the matching law.
It's very hard, as we've been describing, to find places in the quote-unquote like natural environment where you know pretty clearly what the reinforcers are to the degree that you do with these data.
Then perhaps,
and you have so much of them, right? So you have a basketball
liked this article
game
50% more if in the introduction they'd said, it's interesting to look for ways to study the matching law. The NBA or NCAA basketball gives us a huge data set where we can explore that. However, there were many phrases in here that made me believe that this is something that I should be saying, this is so important, and I am so glad this research was done. And perhaps that was an editor thing of, we've got to make this sound like it's something that people want to read or need to read. But I don't know. It just, the whole thing, it bounced off me harder than I think anything I've ever read before. In terms of, at the end, I just said, okay, and ... ellipses. So, you know. I'm down on this one. I'm not down for very, very specific reasons, not due to bad articleness or anything.
It's a gold mine of data, right?
Okay, great.
And it has varying responses available to look at for response allocation with really clear differences in reinforcer. It's amount.
I think it's one of the best ways to systematically explore the matching law in a clinical application, right? Because it's so cut and dry.
Yeah.
But it's not even cut and dry. That's my other problem, is I read through this whole article thinking, this will, the very least, this will say the matching law explains how teams are good or bad at basketball. And then even at the end, the authors do have to warn, now be careful, this is correlative. There are a lot of other factors that go into basketball games other than the allocation of a 2 versus 3-point shot and how sensitive a shooter is, which, spoiler, that's the whole thing. It's the more sensitive a player seemed to be as to whether they took more 2s or 3s did seem to impact whether that was probably considered a good player in terms of more playtime or a good team in terms of how they rank. And this goes into NBA.
You don't want to be a ball hog.
Which, and at the end of this, they've been able to say, and this is how we know that Michael Jordan's one of the best basketball players ever, the matching law. That would blow my mind. But they can't say that because just because you know whether you should take more 2s or 3s doesn't necessarily mean you are now the winningest basketball team, because there are a lot of other factors.
There's also defense.
Exactly. There's a lot of defense. So when it all comes down to it, we've got a study in which it's like, look, this is kind of neat, I guess. And at the end, have we learned anything? Big shrug. So bounced off me, much like a basketball. It bounced real bad.
Okay, why don't you give us the quick version here?
So there's an original study, Vollmer and Beret, which looked at basketball shooting, UOF, University of Florida basketball players in 98-99, to see how do basketball players allocate their shots to 2- and 3-point field goals, to see, hey, is this allocation based on frequency of reinforcement as we'd expect through the matching law? And that's cool, because you know what? That hadn't been done. Why not do it? Then there were 2 more studies, including this one, to look at the exact same kind of relationships. However, this study, they want you to be aware, this study used the generalized matching law and really wanted to look at a lot of different factors. So strike 1 is this is kind of like, is this really a socially important thing to study? Strike 2, multiple studies in one article.
All right.
I hate that so much.
I did pick this article out for you.
Specifically because it had multiple studies.
No, I was like, well, should we do...
was my favorite topic?
No, I was like, should we do Vollmer and Beret? Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, that one is an older one. If we talk about this one, we'll kind of be like rolling that one up into this one as well, which you did because you already mentioned it. And I thought this one was cool because it talked about like varying schools.
Your and my definition of cool is decidedly different, I think.
All right.
Anywho, multiple studies, one article.
Anyway, these authors worked really hard on it, so...
Are they paying you? They've written a lot of other articles. I know Tom Critchfield's written a lot of articles, which we have effusively praised on his show. So I hope I don't think his feelings will be hurt. This one wasn't my cup of tea.
Why don't you pick the one study that you want us to know about?
Well, they all kind of relate. I'm just going to go very quickly through them all because none of them are so different. So once you go over one, you kind of can just hit the results. So the first study really was looking at what if we just kind of replicated the original Beret and Vollmer article looking at Division I basketball. And they looked at the 2005 to 2006 season. They had a bunch of teams. You had to have made some percentage of your 2-point and 3-point field goals to have your data included in the matching law. And most of the time, they also found that the generalized matching law did account for variance in shot selection, but they did find a pattern that is going to hold true through most of the studies, which is the matching law never was a perfect fit. So there's always some under-selection in terms of how the players allocated their shots, which makes sense because they're not machines. They're human beings doing this and, under a lot of other kind of competing reinforcement given times, defense, for example. So they're not going to probably have a perfect fit. And there is a bias for the 3-point shot versus the 2-point shot that cannot be explained by the matching law itself.
I can explain it.
Well, I mean, they do then talk about the fact that they see this is the same as you would see in basic research, in that usually there's a bias among organisms for reinforcers that have a higher quality of reinforcement. Right. 3 being bigger.
Yep.
2. Which I feel like the study was like, anyone who thinks that they can make all the 3s and allocates their shots that way might be a bad player because only so many people can make those shots.
It's true.
So study 2, but what if we did the same thing, but we looked at the explanatory flexibility of the equation, such as, will this model account for situation-specific effects in real life? Like, would we see more or less matching for teams that were successful versus unsuccessful, or players who were good and bad, i.e. played more or played less? And then also who were at a higher versus lower level of competition. So college basketball has various divisions, with Division I being the most competitive, 3 being the least competitive. Or I guess if you were the intramural league, you'd be the least competitive, but Division III kind of being the lowest. So what if we did the same study? We matched everyone's, we took all the players, we used our generalized matching law equation for their 2 versus 3-point shot allocations, looking also at all of those factors. Again, you see the generalized matching law did account for most of the variance for, it matched for most of the players. And you did see that the generalized matching law did account for the variance that you would see between best and worst teams. While there was always some undermatching, so the same as in study 1, they did, and they biased for the 3, they did see that the generalized matching law accounted for more of the variance with the good teams. So better teams seem to have more orderly players. So we said, we're humans, not robots, but the good teams had players that took their shots and allocated their shots to where the reinforcement for them was going to be, i.e. they probably were better at whatever shot they were taking. They spent more time on it, or they had more positional, we don't know exactly why, but they had more kind of environmental awareness of, I'm better off taking a 3 here versus now, I'm better off trying to do a layup and get a 2 here. But whatever reason, they allocated their shots more effectively. You saw this with the teams that were better. You saw this with the players that had more play time. Again, some of the bias for 3s varied a little bit from year to year. Not sure quite why. And you saw this across D1, D2, D3. And for regulars, then for substitute players, we only got a little bit. So again, that could be more that they had more. They met the contingency more often in terms of the shots taken. Not quite sure, but the more
could
orderly
be
the
training,
shot,
right?
Could be more training. The more orderly your patterns of shooting, the better overall you and your team did. Again, that's not causal, but that is correlational. Although there is a great quote here, several of the relevant findings correspond well to lay impressions of basketball, which to me almost sounds like, I guess anyone who watches a lot of basketball could also have predicted the matching law without knowing the matching law exists. Which again is like, well, if anyone could have made this assumption, why put it in a paper? Don't you want to sound smarter than just anyone watching TV? But anyway.
Sometimes that's what science is.
Yeah.
I guess.
Science.
I guess. I would not have phrased it that way if I wanted to say, so this does seem to be in line with that. That sounds a little more. I don't know, whatever. So then what if we looked at individual players rather than teams? So if we had player careers as our data points on the matching law line versus each individual sort of player within a team being a data point. So they took the 50 best NBA players from 79 to 2007. Why 79, you ask? Fun bit of trivia. That's when the 3-point shot was introduced. So you can't
I did not know that.
I didn't either. So there you go. 1979, the 3-point shot. And what they found, again, was even for the best players, and these are the best players who played for a long period of time, enough that they could, get a graph on the generalized matching law equation, you saw, again, that most of the variance in individual player shot selection saw some level of undermatching, but not always a bias for the 3. But again, you did see that it did explain a lot of the differences when studying individuals versus aggregate data. The bias estimates really varied. So some players like Charles Barkley loved the 3, had a bias for it. Magic Johnson did not have a bias for either shot. Michael Jordan had a bias for the 2-point shot, which again, I'd like to talk to a basketball fan to say, do you remember Jordan doing more 2s than 3s? Mostly all I know about Jordan is always do those cool slam dunks, right? So that makes sense as a lay basketball fan to explain how this could be. But again, this is all very interesting. And isn't it cool to know about the biases of these individual players related to their shot allocation? And the matching law does appear to speak as to it has something to do with the good versus the bad teams. But again, how well does this actually predict anyone's later performance? Are team versus individual analysis that different? Do we care enough to look at that? And also, we don't know that, while we know that the GML is going to account for most of that shot selection variation that we see in basketball players, like I kind of already said, we don't necessarily know that this therefore leads to good versus bad team. So is shot allocation a key function of that, or is it just one variable of many? Which is interesting in some ways, but also kind of a thud to end with. I know scientifically you can't make a giant assumption of, and because matching law, teams good equals or teams bad, which would be the fun statement to make, but is not real and would be bad science. So I do appreciate that they're being very honest that, hey, these results are interesting, but aren't necessarily going to change how we bet on basketball in the future. Though I suppose that might be a factor you want to take into account in your office Final Four pool this March. So anywho, the matching law can look a little bit more at some bit of cause and effect relationships in real world context, better than, say, descriptive methods. Though, again, it is not, foolproof. It does not tell us all the answers. So that was the study. All right, fine. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Let's wrap it up.
It was written well.
Oh yeah, of course.
I'm not knocking this. I feel like everyone is like, oh man, I have a bone to pick with with Alphonic, I don't like him, or Alphonic, like you ran over my dog or something. No, it was a really well written article, and it looked at the question it wanted to answer in a very thorough and readable and understandable way. I don't know why it just felt very big. I just have not shrugged or bounced off an article so much. I just wanted to bring it up for anyone who thinks that I'm too positive about everything. I'm not. Trust me. Just listen to the previous 10 minutes. So
do you think you would read more articles that?
No, actually, this article made me never want to read articles again. We're not getting to 300. I'm not reading anymore. I'm done now.
I'm done article reading.
The last article I ever read.
Oh no.
Now, do I want to read more articles about basketball?
About the matching law?
About the matching law?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like.
No, it's okay. You can allocate your responding away from
if you chase
law.
me down with a matching law article, I run to the other side of the room. The conditional probabilities say maybe. Anyway, let's talk about matching law in the dissemination station.
Forgot that was my job.
That's your job.
My only job.
Well, no, you had to describe the matching law, which was the hardest of the articles to do. Well, matching law, it's neat. Do we need to know all the quantities? Like if you listen to this and said, I feel like I know a little bit more about the matching law, learning about, biases and thinking about applications potentially in social reinforcement and avoidance, interesting stuff. I don't need to memorize that equation for I shall never use it. Okay, cool. I think we hope you learned a little bit more that way. But if you are so quantitatively inclined, you can dig really deep into looking at behavioral allocation across lots of important contexts. Maybe you'll be the one to answer the question of, is shot allocation the most important predictor of whether your basketball team is good or bad? In which case, get on DraftKings as fast as you can, I guess, because you've cracked the code. But if you just listened to all this and said, that's cool, I'm glad I learned a little bit more about the matching law, and now I'll go back to just kind of remembering that's a thing, I don't know if that's necessarily bad. That's how you're allocating your responding tomorrow with your paper, with your stack of research articles to read.
I enjoyed reading that there were a lot of different human applications for the matching law, right? Because I feel like you learn about it in school and you say exactly what you said, Rob. That's cool, but that's mostly for pigeons. And then you kind of don't really worry about it anymore until Jason Beret is surprised that you don't know how to fit curves in Excel. But there were a lot of examples in these articles of ways in which human responding also adheres to the matching law. And I think that is a really good thing to remember, right? We are not special organisms. We behave just as other organisms do, and our behavior is going to follow reinforcement, just like other organisms' behavior is. So I feel like, we all just did the Science of Consequences book club as well. And that was the heart of that too, which is consequences really matter, and they're all around us and they're operating all the time. Do we always know all of the pieces that are present? Not really, but it doesn't mean that the forces with which behaviors flowing aren't lawful and orderly. Both of these come back to that same point, which I think is a good reminder for all of us. We have a lot of ways in which behavior can be altered if we stop and think about it. So saying like, it happens out of the blue, or I just can't change this, or there's no way to understand or fix this is likely not the case.
Well, let's just say if I'm ever at like a Babbitt party or Derek Reed or Jason Beret or, any of the authors here want to corner me and start talking more about the matching law, I promise I will not run to the other side of the taped line on the room. I will stay and listen. I'm not averse to matching law discussion, but I probably will do more of the nodding and than I will actually sharing anything of mathematical value when it comes to the matching law.
Cool. I think I agree with you that I think it's always important to know about it, know that it's out there, and remind ourselves that it's out there. And so when we're stuck on a specific case or client, we can refer back and use the application, the clinical applications, to kind of provide another alternative to what we're currently thinking about for our clients. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Oh, well, let's wrap it up with pairings.
All right. Yay. There's no song for pairings. Yeah. So now is time for pairings, which is the section of the show where I remind you of some past episodes that you might want to check out if you found this one to be titillating. We've never talked about the matching law before. Oh, Rob didn't like that.
It's not the phrase I would have
Real head scratcher. We never talked about the matching law before, but I would like for everyone out there to know that we have a whole section in our previous episodes page called The Basics, where we review some of those harder to tackle concepts that are, basic concepts in our field, but we do so hopefully in a way that makes sense, or is like a refresher for you, perhaps, because you already learned all that. You're already BCBAs, many of you out there.
Students just reviewing.
Yeah. So there are several episodes in there that I think are related to this, or also like good refresher ones too. So those are the ones that I've stuck in here for you today. They include episode 126, Behavioral Economics with Derek Reed. Episodes 175 and 195, where we talk about token economies first alone and then joined and absolutely schooled by Jason Bray.
We were totally schooled. It was the most...
But the most that he came on the show to be like, you're all very wrong. And I'm going to tell you this, as opposed to the very friendly and informative way.
Oh my God. That episode is so good.
It's so good.
Yes. Everyone should go listen to 195.
I think we were taught, I think is a more... describes
we
the
were
social
definitely
interaction.
Taught.
We were taught.
So good. It's so good.
You'll be taught too if you listen to episode 195.
Yeah. Episode 143, Stimulus Equivalence. Episode 223, Generality and Generalization. Episode 248, Delayed Discounting with Amy Odom. And episode 256, Acceleration Charts Explained with Jared Van.
You described, Diana, that a lot of those are in the basics section.
Yes.
And basics, those are all things you know. Those would still be topics I would say you can be taught a lot, because we don't talk about our basics all the time. And it's nice to kind of go back and review them as you've gained your own level of knowledge about this field and maybe gotten a little rusty with the basics.
Maybe it's also
a personal experience.
Some of these are the basics in the sense that it's more translational research.
Yes.
I can't believe you didn't put our behavioral momentum studies in there.
Oh, yeah. I'll do that too.
Okay.
Also, episode 86, in which we discuss behavioral momentum with
writing these in the notes, even though she just needs to say them on
Bill
the
Ahern.
Well, remember, for posterity.
Yeah. And then our snack today is birthday pie.
Oh, yes.
What's a birthday pie?
It's a pie for your birthday because I don't like cake.
So it's literally just a pie, but
Yep.
it's at a birthday time?
Yep.
I was going to let you pick the flavor.
Strawberry rhubarb.
Ah, there we go.
It's a good one.
Please enjoy.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to our episode on the matching law. Thanks to Jackie and Diana, as always, for being here to discuss. And thank you all listeners for listening. We hope you enjoyed ABA Inside Track. Why not subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can leave reviews at all of those places. You can also find us online at abainsidetrack.com, where you can find links to all of the articles we discussed, all of the research articles we discussed, and emails and all that good stuff. We're also on the socials as ABA Inside Track. If you want even more ABA Inside Track content, then head on over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can subscribe at any level to get access to some of our kind of fun extra listener features, like our quarterly listener choice polls. But if you subscribe at the $5 and up level, you get access to those listener choice episodes in a raw video format, where you get to see all the zaniness, plus get a free CE. And speaking of the science of consequences, if you want to get access to our 2-hour extra long podcast book clubs every quarter, you can sign up at the $10 level to get those right when they come out, as well as to get 2 additional CEs. So if you're doing the math, folks, that's 3 CEs per season just for being a patron. That's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And finally, some thanks. Oh, wait, before we get to the thanks, you thought I was over. You need the second secret code word if you're interested in CEs, and that is Stabby. Stabby. Where'd that come from? Well, Jackie lent us one of those like Reiki mats.
It's not a Reiki mat.
Not a Reiki mat. What's
That's
it called?
ridiculous.
What's a Reiki? Is something else?
Yes, it is. So I let you borrow my Shakti mat.
Shakti mat. That's the word
which deals with acupuncture.
Yes, and it was sitting right next to where I was taking notes when I wrote this, and I said, those things look stabby. And I said, that's the code word for us. So stabby is your code word.
I thought you were feeling stabby.
What? Like, no, that's violent. No, those things are stabby. They poke you.
Oh, people say that online if they're just annoyed.
I'm feeling
They do?
stabby?
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to use it.
Ooh, I don't care for that. That's too violent.
Extra annoyed. Raging.
I'm into
so
it.
angry I want to stab you with something. I don't like that
No, I'm feeling
all.
stabby. Yeah. I'm there. I feel it.
That's what I just said. No, folks. Be safe out there. And that's the end of the show. So go do something safe. Thanks. Final thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro, outro music, Kyle Sturry for interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.
Happy birthday.